Welcome back, everybody, to the Omega Metroid podcast. It is episode 147 here. We are recording on January 9th. I don't usually say the date we're recording. I hope we put this episode out soon. Certainly we will. We're back in the new year for our second episode in 2023. 147 episodes. That's pretty crazy. And I'm back here, your boy Dak, hosting an episode of the show with two other awesome Metroid fans here. It's not often that we get three people on the show, and it's not that often that we have this particular combination because it is the first time that we've had this particular combination. Before I lead into that, I'm going to say hello to my good friend Doom. I believe this is the first time we've been chatting on the show in 2023. Doom, how you doing?
Yeah, welcome back, Dak. I mean, it's been a while.
I want to say the last episode we did was honoring 20 years of Metroid Fusion. Or was I even on that?
It might have even been the last Mapping Metroid episode.
No, I mean, I want to say I wasn't on an episode in December. So I think that's true. Was I? I don't know. It's been a while. Either way. Well, I mean, it's a Metroid Prime Hunters episode. Spoilers. So I had to be here. I don't know where Andy is, to be honest. And I figured, you know what? I'll take the reins this time. It's my show, and it's your show, and it's also our third member's show here for tonight. We have the one and only, the resident Metroid Prime Hunters expert in our Discord server, possibly in the community. When I think of Metroid Prime Hunters, I think of this guy. When I say that I'm a fan of Metroid Prime Hunters, that is false in comparison relatively to this guy. You might know him as Spire Fan. Spire, how you doing tonight, man?
Pretty good. It's good to be on here. Good to talk about Metroid. I'm excited for this. A little quick bit about me. Yeah, I've been using Spire Fan since early 2006. Right when I got on Wi-Fi and you chose a tag, I was like, all right, well, you can have a tag different from your DS name. Spire_fan.
Boom. That's all you need.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you for being on the show tonight, man. Of course, we have you on not only because you're a big Metroid fan, but because specifically you are a big Metroid Prime Hunters fan. And we are talking tonight about Metroid Prime Hunters. We are here for another Mapping Metroid, and it is time to do our first one, I believe, ever from Metroid Prime Hunters. Which, I mean, isn't crazy because we've only done so many of those episodes, but still, a huge feat to kick off the new year somewhat. We're going to be talking about the Vesper Defense Outpost, VDO, and all that entails as we dive into a Mapping Metroid. Before we got into this, though, I was kind of talking with y'all about like what else is happening in the Metroid world, and it doesn't really seem like much else is aside from the billionth Metroid Prime, HD remaster, rumors, which we talked about. At least y'all did on the episode last week. We still have not heard anything, as is part of the course for these kinds of rumors where we're like, oh, you better get primed up tomorrow for some Metroid Prime, and then never comes, and then next month someone else needs clicks. Actually, I did see that there was like a solid 5-day stretch in which GameSpot was like tweeting out the Metroid Prime rumor article like at the same time every day, and I'm like, oh, someone's tweet deck is broken. Someone's social media manager forgot to log in for a week and didn't fix that.
Hey, you know what? The inflation's high right now. They got to pay the bills,
It gets clicks. That's the best part about that too, is that like I looked at each one, and each one got like unique responses as if they hadn't been posting it every day. Like some people are like terminally online, and they see that GameSpot's posting this every day. There's some people who had no idea. So like on the fourth post, there's still people coming in and be like, I don't know this, as if they're reporting on it for the first time, which I thought was very funny. So you're right. The stocks are up and it's paying off. Was there any other Metroid news that I missed?
Nothing particular. So I don't know if anyone watches the Kit and Krista podcast. They were two former
Nintendo Minute.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Nintendo Minute was goated. I missed that, but their podcast is super dope. I love listening to it. And they're not leaking anything. They were just purely making predictions, but they made an interesting prediction that I don't think I agree with, but I thought it was just interesting just because of, they used to work for Nintendo of America, but they think that Prime 4 is coming out this year, which I don't buy that. I think that's 2024 at the earliest, but I just thought that was really interesting nonetheless.
That Prime 4 comes out this year.
this year as
This
a
year.
holiday 2023 title.
Well, that's what I've been saying this whole time, so I'm with that. Spire, what do you think about that?
Go for it. Announce it this summer, and then yeah, like holiday release. You know what? Retro's known to do really good under crunch. I'm not telling them to rush things, but Prime 1 was a bit crunched, and it still was a masterpiece. So they could do it.
See, my thing, I mean, obviously no one wants crunch. I think the thing with this game, obviously, is that it was being developed during the pandemic, right? And I think that's the biggest hurdle for them. I don't, because the game restarted development, what, 2019, 2018?
Yeah.
2019. So, like, that's been over 3 years for them to develop it. Let's say that, they had the burden of, like, maybe being set behind a year, by the pandemic. That would still mean the game's coming out relatively soon. Like, and a lot of companies really pivoted to work from home situations pretty well. I don't know how Retro's doing it if people started working from home. I imagine some people did, but I would have to imagine that. I don't think they're crunching. I think they were just trying to, go with the flow of COVID and all of that. But still, I mean, it's been a while since the game's been announced. If it does come out this year, it'll be 6 years since it was originally announced, which isn't crazy overall in the industry, but it's one of the longer kind of waits we've had in a while for a game. I would be down for this year as well.
I mean, I'd be down for. I just don't think it's happening this year. 2024, it feels right.
2024, but yeah, I mean, if it is, then hopefully it's a really good game. Hopefully it comes out in Switch 2 or Switch Pro or whatever it is.
Retro. They've never released a bad game. They're in good hands.
That is true.
Oh, I just wanted to say the other day was just talking about, someone was in the Prime Hunters Revival Discord. They were asking about, oh wait, did Sylux show up in other games? I was like, oh yeah, and I showed the Prime 3 secret ending, and I was like, 2007? Okay, I'm patient, but wow, yeah, that cliffhanger.
I mean, there was also Federation Force.
Yeah,
I was about to say the most critical of cameos for Sylux is in Federation Force.
I like that one too. Yeah, it's just crazy that we ended in 07 on that cliffhanger. But
yeah, right.
I like that they put that in. So
after waiting for Dread, which was on the cliffhanger from 2002, right? Like that's a crazier wait. I think the thing with the Sylux thing though is that like with Fusion into Dread, like Fusion was such a build up into like who knows what's gonna happen next in one degree, whereas I think with Sylux, because we still know so little, it was more like anything is possible, and like the weight doesn't feel as like crazy. I feel like because the looming dread like above was like some of the crazier weight. I never really like, as much as I've always wanted Metroid Prime 4, I think part of me was never like, oh, I need to know what happens next. It was more like, I can't wait to see what happens next. Whereas for Dread, it was like, I desperately need an ending to the current story, which we finally got.
Yeah, exactly. And especially because like that's at the end of the timeline, whereas Prime is technically a prequel, and so it's like, well, we know that Samus is gonna get out of here eventually. So
that's also true. We know Samus eventually survives in the end.
Well, and I was on the Dread train too, because when Prime Hunters came out in 06, not only did Nintendo Power do killer marketing for that, they led into corruption, and they even covered like those Dread scan log rumors and all that stuff. So someone like me back in middle school, late elementary school, like, oh my gosh, more Metroid. Yeah.
Yeah, 2006 was a banner year for Metroid in that regard. We have corruption like on the way. I mean, that's kind of around the time like 2005, 2006 when like Dread was kind of apparently like appearing at E3 and like being mentioned there as well. So it wasn't just like alongside like the scans of Prime 3. It kind of felt like it was going to be a real thing. And coming off, Pinball and Hunters coming out recently, and then Prime 3 on the way, like best time to be a Metroid fan. How could you not become a fan of the franchise at that time?
And best of all, 2005 was the year Prime Pinball released. So hey, that's just peak Metroid, if you ask me.
That's peak right there. That's peak fiction. Well, hopefully we find out something about Metroid Prime 4 or the remake or whatever soon, because it has been now a year and a few months since Metroid Dread's come out, and we're ready for the next game. We're ready for what's up next.
E3 is looking shiny this year.
We got E3, we got, another Summer Games Fest, we got the Game Awards. We hopefully have a Nintendo Direct coming up in the next couple months, right? There's usually like a February, March Direct. Like, who knows what that's going to have. With our luck, it's going to be a partner Direct, but fingers crossed that it's not. It's going to be a ton of anime JRPGs and a bunch of farming Minecraft-y games, and then that's it. So, can't wait for that. But
And
enough
Mario
about
Kart DLC.
and Mario Kart DLC, the inevitability, which that is actually dope. I'm always down for that. I feel like eventually they're not going to release another Mario Kart game until every track in the Mario Kart series that's ever been made is in that game. As far as I'm concerned. As far as I'm concerned, like why would they make another one? They'll just keep releasing tracks. All right, let's get into this. We've been chatting a little bit here for about 11 minutes or so about not the episode, but on the episode here tonight, we were talking about the Vesper Defense Outpost, commonly shortened to VDO, is one of the first or one of the earliest areas you actually go to in the game or have the choice to go to in the game. And we have Spire here to talk about this, as it is a Metroid Prime Hunters episode. Generally, if you haven't listened to a Mapping Metroid episode in the past, if you're a new listener, if you just haven't, we have 140 something episodes of this show. I'm sure not everyone's listened to every single one. I'm sure a lot of you pick and choose, which is cool. If you haven't listened to a Mapping Metroid just yet, generally we go through every little, not every little, but major details and minor details of the areas, the general layout, the lore behind it, the enemies you'll find, the bosses you'll defeat, and all the other cool things. With the added bonus here tonight, we have the first time of doing which we also talked about before the show, of doing an area that also doubles as multiplayer areas. So we're actually going to talk about the area in terms of the layout and how it functions in the single player campaign. And then we will circle back to talking about them in a multiplayer perspective in a context of playing it with friends and enemies. So that's how we do things. We're going to get rolling here. So the Vesper Defense Outpost, you know what, Spire, since it's your first time on the show, and thank you again for joining us, give us a brief overview. What is the Vesper Defense Outpost? If I've never played Metroid Prime Hunters, why is Samus there? What is she doing there? What is it? Why is it important that we have to go to this place? What is it? Tell me about it.
How many other Metroid games have you played? We're
okay. I'm all right. Let's say I've played Super Metroid, Metroid Prime, and I just played Dread.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Vesper Defense Outpost, I would first say, is that the Alimbics are very close to the Chozo. They're very, a very wise group of alien species. They're basically pacifists, but the ironic part about Vesper Defense Outpost is they basically were like, oh, we're getting invaded. This alien, spoilers, called Guria just crashed through Celestial Archive. We had to put all these things together to seal them up. We don't want to get invaded again. Let's use our minds. We got to make weapons, and we got to defend the Alimbic cluster from other invaders. And as a Metroid Dread fan, you'd be like, well, what do you mean? And I'd be like, oh, Ravenbeak and his guys. Imagine if they tried to step in. That's why you got to have these, these weapons everywhere to defend against that. But that's probably what he's after. That's the ironic part. So that's what this station is. Yep.
So this is essentially, the Alimbics are another alien race that, just like the Chozo, like the Luminoth, exist in the Metroid universe, and at some point decided we need a munitions depot. We need to make weapons and ammunition, and we need to store it somewhere. And that is essentially kind of what the place is for. And that kind of deals into the general layout and structure of the area, because it's laid out as like, this is where it's a big storage unit almost, essentially. And it's super cold because it has a ton of like radioactive and like nuclear based weaponry on it. That's the general idea of what it was meant for. And they didn't want it to be, too hot, so things would start getting crazy nuclear. So they had it essentially held at sub-zero temperatures and super cold temperatures. And then by the time Samus has gotten to it, the Alimbics haven't been around for a while. The general entire outpost hasn't been maintained for who knows how long. And so everything's frozen over. It's essentially coming back from vacation and your pipes burst and it's December and your whole house was flooded and then frozen over. Doom, is that about accurate? Is that those takeaways?
Yeah, that's pretty good. I actually really like that detail about all the ice. So a lot of the ice that's frozen around is like busted fuel reserves that has been stored for eons at this point, and it kind of almost formed these almost planetary like rings around the defense station. It's a really cool aesthetic when you're looking at this place from far away. And then once you go inside, you have like all of these cooling ventricles, and you have bioorganic technologies and stuff like that. Your standard Metroid flair, but it's just all super interesting and really cool.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And I think when you look at the the VDO from like as Samus is approaching, or like when you select it in game, like at least for me growing up and like even now, like because how the DS, like it just doesn't, like the resolution on these images is not great. Like when like when you look at the area itself on the map, like you can't really get a good idea of what it really looks like, but you have somewhat of an idea, and like your brain kind of fills it in. And I just love like the silhouette and like just the general like blurriness of it, of like you see this structure and then it's like bursted at the seams by all these like huge ice spikes that like spiral around. It was always a really cool, that's one nice thing about, I think, Metroid Prime Hunters, that because it isn't so high, like HD, and came out when it did, that your brain kind of fills in some details, like in terms of how things look, and your imagination can, really fill that in and makes it, I don't know, it gives it a different effect.
No, it's kind of doing that analog horror that people love doing
Yeah.
now. Like people love that N64, Doom 64 horror aesthetic. I mean, the Zelda games. I say that the 64 Zelda games are some of the greatest E-rated horror games, and it's got that similar. Especially, we'll get to it later, but in Stasis Bunker, when it does that depths music, and I've shared it before, like the very eerie music. You could basically put that in an Emmy room. There's some cool stuff for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool aspects to this that we'll definitely dive into.
Another thing about the ice particles too that's really cool. It's not, you don't just see them from the outside, but there's specific parts where you can actually have windows that you can see into the space.
Yes.
And depending on the angle that you're looking at, you can actually see the ice particles orbiting outside, which is just such a cool little detail that they added in this game. There's a lot of really cool stuff that they do with the both the space station areas in general in this game. But yeah,
100% agreed. Yeah, I think even like the gateway room, if you look up like where you came in from your ship, you can see like the stars, and you can see like just like the edges of the ice like crept around the top, which is such a nice little part.
And you can even see the skybox rotating as like with the space station orbiting too. There's like so many little details packed into this tiny DS game.
Absolutely. The only other things that kind of stuck out to me before we jump into the more granular details of this area. First off, I thought it was really interesting how you, or at least I guess to me, before I, like as a kid, I remember the first time I played this, when I got to this area, I thought this was like a human outpost, because it kind of feels, when you walk through it, like the rooms feel just kind of like very like functionally human, right? They're just kind of like plain, like rectangular, like they don't have that kind of chozo, like an alien's walking through this walkway, right? It almost feels like the tutorial, like the beginning of Prime 3. You're just kind of walking through like space station, like forward rectangular hallways. And obviously later, the Alimbics are obviously not human. But I remember that as a kid, I thought that this place was a human outpost at first, like not being cognizant of like the lore I'm reading at all. It just kind of gave me that look to it.
What adds to that is, I mean, I kind of, in 2006, I was a bit scared of those Alimbic ghosts when you turned on your scan visor, because that kind of adds to that vibe of like, okay, someone was here, and you can get all that lore just by scanning the ghosts and stuff. Yeah, no, totally.
I think it's really, well, I was gonna say, I think it's really interesting, because I feel like it feels less and less human, like the further you go into
agreed,
you go into it. Like you start with normal seeing rooms, but then again, like we'll talk about it later, but as you're collecting the battle hammer, you have this busted tank full of like organic brain like material that's like you find out is powering like the station and stuff like that. We'll talk about Stasis Bunker later, which is a super cool area in general. The fuel stack, and just you discover more and more alien weirdness as you progress through it, which I think is a really nice touch.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it has the facade of like being very familiar, but as you go deeper, is very much not so. So let's dive right into that. The general layout of the VDO is, I mean, it's pretty simple, right? Like you get to the gateway, you land in there. It's like a 3-tier, huge room, big enough for your gunship. After that, it kind of leads you to a straight line into the weapons complex. And then from there, you can kind of branch out if you either want to kind of go to like, the cortex and compression chamber area, which I believe is where, the battle hammer eventually is. It also goes in the other direction to the stasis bunker and the fuel stack areas. Like I said, we're going to talk about the campaign and the single player aspect of these rooms first. So Spire, let bring us in. So you start at the gateway, like tell us about this room, and then go from there.
Yeah, I mean, you said it well. Okay, so it's kind of like a lot of other games have this thing where you wonder if the design of the game, you're trying to guess if it's more for the lore or more for the protagonist. And so in this case, when Samus lands her gunship, it is well designed for her gunship to land on.
Yes.
But I can see that the lore justifies this because if it's an outpost, there's going to be a lot of other ships that will land in there, and
For
hopefully
sure.
maybe they're trading weaponry and stuff like that. So I love that detail. The space is big enough to be bigger than ships than Samus's. One thing I love is like the first room you walk into, there's just that machine, and out comes a bunch of those like Petraceal Metroid looking enemies,
Hmm.
and they don't hurt you unless you run into them. They're kind of just doing their thing and run in a circle. It's almost like what scientists left these guys to hope, just exist and run in a
Hmm.
circle. Like, and so it kind of goes back to the whole bioweapons thing, and you can really start delving into the whole Metroid link, but that's more fan theory stuff. And then, like you said, after you leave that room, you start to enter the weapons complex, which is like the first major like area. And yeah, and all the turrets. I like how ASAP they're trying to establish, yeah, they're supposed to be like auto turrets and stuff that doesn't want you here.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff that's in this in this area, you have bunch of guardians you end up fighting. Like I think the first time you end up in there, like you're fighting like one guardian. I think the second time I went through my recent playthrough, you fight like 5 or 6 of those guardians. Like there's a lot of defensive stuff in here. Like don't come in here. You're not supposed to be here. Get out. And that's a really nice touch to that. Again, like that's very familiar when you enter, very unfamiliar as you get deeper. And you mentioned the weapons complex. This is kind of your first kind of battlegroundy area because eventually you can fight Sylux here. I'm pretty sure I fought him on like my first time getting to this area. And what I really liked about this was eventually during the fight, and we'll talk about the Sylux fight later. But I love how he like in the middle of the fight will like lures you into that one side room and you chase him and then his ship comes in, which I think is interesting that the outpost has 2 different areas where ships can come in and out for some reason, but also that he has his ship ready to go and he lures you in. You have to start fighting both of them at the same time. Awesome, awesome little part.
I think Sylux jukes that already. And I've said this before because people are
Okay.
asking how will Sylux fight in Prime 4. But you look at this exact fight and just his play style with like the lockjaw and shot coil, he's wanting to sabotage and trap like whoever his opponent is. So in this
Mm-hmm.
case, it's in Prime Hunters, and maybe, in Prime 4, he's already 2 steps ahead in this case. He's already like, oh yeah, whoever's entering here, I'm going to try to take out. And obviously he hates Samus, so that's why he was so prepared in this point that he's going to bring out his own gunship to
Mm-hmm.
shoot on her.
Yeah, absolutely. Dude, any takeaways from that?
Yeah, it's easily like the most unique of the bounty hunter fights in the game. I was just about to talk about because of the ship aspect. Like all of the bounty hunter fights in the single player, at least, they play out relatively the same. I think maybe except for like the triple fight between Noxus
Oh, I love
and
that one.
Trace as well when you would go to
Awesome.
Artera. But
Yeah.
but yeah, in terms of like just the raw fight, like because of that ship and like the way like Sylux like toys around with you and plays with the arena, like there's a little bit like it like subtly adds like a little bit more personality, like Spire was talking about, and kind of what his play style is like. And I very much I look at him as kind of like and I'm gonna use Fortnite terms just because I've been playing it, but like he's all about third party. And for those who don't know what third partying is, basically if you're doing like a 1v1v1 fight. Let's say 2 people are in the middle of a fight. You go in on that fight while they're distracted and they're fighting each other. And that's I feel like that's kind of like what Sylux did with the ship. Is he wanted Samus to lure him and get her engaged with him in that fight, and then the ship comes out of nowhere when you least expect it. And that's kind of like the feeling I get with Sylux, and
Oh,
hopefully that'll be translated again in Prime 4.
exactly too, because people already are theorizing like, oh, in Prime 4, Sylux gonna team up with the Space Pirates, and me and other people are like, I think he wants to instigate like Ridley versus Samus, and then he gets them both or something like a double whammy. Also, just want to say the Spire fight left an impression on me, so the high ground Magmall shot. You talk about the rival fights.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think Sylux is teaming up with anybody. Like he's
Yeah.
teaming up with himself, right? Which that's all, he's looking out for number one. So I 100% agree. He's gonna be like, hey, I'm gonna instigate some kind of crazy thing and then take advantage of that. I could see that being the general story of Metroid Prime 4. Like there's some kind of some kind of interaction between the Federation and the pirates that like something's happening between them, another fight or whatever it is, and then you learn later that Sylux is the one who ends up instigating the whole entire thing, and he's trying to take advantage for his own gain, obviously. But yeah, no, that's go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Well, I'm just saying that and clearly Retro or they're going to study this game as source material. Like Sylux is heavily hinted for Prime 4. They're going to look at this game. His play style is here. Like we're talking about right now at VDO, all of that stuff is laid out. He's got the traps. All his vendettas are right on the table. So
yeah, and
also Tanabe is producing, and he played a very big role in producing this title as well. So
yes,
a lot of those connective through lines should be intact, I hope.
I mean, I hope so too. I definitely think there's so much to draw from, and since we're already talking about the Sylux fight, let's continue to do that. No problem with that. Yeah, I think there's so much you can take away from just the general, like, this is his play style, this is how you're going to anticipate him fight. That in mind, actually fighting him in this game, when I first fought it, like picking it up again and fighting him, like, this dude is annoying, man. Like, he's got that like Winston left click from Overwatch. Like, he just chases you down and never stops dealing damage because of his shot coil, right? So like that fight, like when it took me a second. I was like, okay, this guy is like jumping around, doing crazy damage, and fighting you in this like side room ish of the weapons complex. You gotta move around on him. It's actually a pretty, at least like having not played the game in a while, somewhat of a challenging fight for me, at least, like getting on the DS, like getting back into it. He was, I think by virtue of his weapon kind of, and of course the lockjaw, became a bit of a nuisance for me. I don't know. As expert Spire, what do you think of it as a boss fight in terms of difficulty?
This is not the case where the boss unlocked in multiplayer is nerfed. That is exactly how Sylux tends to play in multiplayer. He was highly played in competitive for all those reasons you just listed. The shot coil absorbing life was huge. There was literally like the Sylux sweet spot. You had to stay out of short range, especially like me playing Spire. Like the second he started locking that on me, I had to go in alt form and like rush him down, because thankfully your hurt box changes in alt form, so he couldn't latch on as easy if you go into the Dialanche. But in this case, the one buff I will say is headshots don't work the exact same in single player, because like in multiplayer, it's like 4 or 5 power beam headshots, Sylux is out. But in this one, they sequence the fights to where it's fixed. So if you're not really focused, he's just going to keep absorbing your health.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about like those damage numbers, so that's really interesting. Although it makes sense that like the health of the bosses would be buffed, just because, to compensate for the AI versus a real player who's going to do a lot more with that.
Right. Yeah, no, I definitely had that feeling of like, I go into the Sylux boss fight, I'm like, oh, I'm just playing a Sylux player right now, like this. Except he's jumping way too much to be a Sylux player, from what I was.
He's got that bumper jumper set up.
That dude is jumping, and that's kind of like how you have to beat him, because he's constantly moving, and you're playing as Samus. I'm like, okay, I can't just like, it's hard to track him while he's jumping around. So at least for me, like the strategy I was employing, I'm just waiting for him to land, because he can't really change direction once he's jumped. So like I'm like, all right, like I'm gonna wait for him to jump. Oh, he's about to land. I'm gonna have a charged like missile ready for him once he lands. It was either that, or I would just try to jump in midair at him and hope we kind of like body blocked on each other, and I would just like mash on him because he's right in front of me. Those are my strats to it. I don't know what the elite strats were, but that was my strat. And then I actually found the lockjaw kind of easy to deal with, because he would kind of like, I felt like I was able to fall back and he would do his lockjaw stuff, and I didn't have to worry about it. I kind of just ignored it and wait until he went back into his normal form. The lockjaw I felt like is way stronger in the hands of a human opponent in multiplayer than the boss.
No, completely. If he had multiplayer experience, new age,
that would be such a good fight.
5-star legendary hunter license.
Yeah. He would literally just put 2 lockjaw bombs on whatever resource or choke point you want to get out of, and now you're really like stuck.
Yeah, I would love that though. Like if like ever remade the game or made a no one, like give me like human difficulty mode, like above the hardest difficulty, like give me like the best, like based on human play AI boss battles. That'd be a lot of fun.
Because or else Trace just kills everyone in 1 second. So you got to add a little bit of like artificial inaccuracy or something.
Yeah,
no,
that would.
Sure.
You'd be seeing that little angelic sprite when you die like quite a bit. It would be the new Emmy cutscene.
Yeah.
That would be a lot. I'd hope for the boss battle where if you die, it just like resets instantly. I don't have to like wait for the whole cutscene to go again and like, oh my god, I'm not playing this. Yeah, and then of course the Sylux's ship, the Delano 7 comes in. That's a really cool aspect of it. I also think it's really a good little bit of juxtaposition or just like planning, I guess, by the devs by having the battle hammer be in the area that you end up fighting Sylux first, because I found the battle hammer as a good option to deal with him when he's in lockjaw mode, because you kind of sit back and he's not jumping around, so it's a lot easier to hit those lob shots. So I actually thought that was nice because you get the battle hammer and then you go and fight him. Like, oh, I actually have a tool I just got to fight him in his alt form, and then you kind of stick to power beam shots and then missiles while he's in normal form. So I thought that was a nice little touch there.
Yeah, the splash damage also really helps on that battle hammer as well.
Good point. Yeah, that's actually a really good point, and it's perfect for that usage against someone who's like moving constantly and doesn't need to aim. Like having something that has AoE splash damage is kind of like the answer in that rock paper scissors kind of scenario. Yeah, so I mean, a really awesome boss battle. Definitely think it's indicative of what we will see from Sylux and Metroid Prime 4. I would hope so. I think just great to draw from. Let's get. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I will say, and I've talked about this before, I personally think the Hunters soundtrack is criminally underrated. I think there's a lot of cool, unique aspects of it. I love kind of the way it incorporates both bass guitar and kind of syncopated rhythms into its melodies. I think it's a really interesting touch that you don't see in a lot of Metroid soundtracks, but I think it works for this game. I will say, though, I'm not a fan of the Hunters themes. I think it's a cool idea in concept, but it just ends up getting very repetitive after a while. And unfortunately, I feel the same way with Sylux's theme as well, where you have the same kind of bass melody underneath with some new instruments kind of layered on top. And I don't think it quite works in that, but otherwise, yeah, I think it's a really cool fight.
I wonder if that's a case of like, I've talked about this with, there's like the repetitive syndrome of how they reuse the same two bosses 3 more times each. But those two bosses, if they were just by themselves without being repeated, they're actually really cool. Like,
yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And so, like you just said, they tried to incorporate that these are your 6 rivals and they're going across the planets like you are. And it is cool to imagine, like, how did Spire experience VDO? But yeah, they show up so much that you do hear that song a lot. I think I've talked to you a little about this, Doom, is that if I was like the composer and I'm bringing these characters back, I would extract those unique elements per hunter. So like Spire had the heavy bass, Sylux had like that orchestra, and then write something kind of new, but keep those elements intact. So you keep like a motif, but you can write, whatever. Be a fun challenge. So
maybe in terms of the syncopation, you could keep it the same, but I think I think just that keeping the main melodies intact for all 6 hunters, I feel like, and especially like once you get to the Goria fight and they reuse it a 7th time again after that, it's like, okay, come on now. Like,
I will say, shout outs to the Noxus choir. I hope Noxus comes
yes.
back.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I think the idea of having like unique ideally hunter themes is really cool though, and like they definitely should if they have multiple themes or multiple hunters. I mean, like even in Metroid Prime 3, the new hunters, they had their own themes, right? I do agree with you, Spire. I would like if there was like one connecting motif between all of them, but just like in such a more subtle way, and then like again, like yeah, extrapolate that main core. I'm with you on that one. But also 100% agree with you, Doom. These get really repetitive. I also think they feel too gamey and arcadey to me. Like, like if there's you're out in the middle of nowhere in space and on this abandoned like munitions depot, and then someone else shows up on that and starts to fight you, like that to me, that needs like a really good theme, like either really hype or like really like heavy, like this is a significant moment. And then maybe you kind of change up a little bit as you realize, oh, this is par for the course. I'm going to be running into a lot of people later. So I feel like maybe having a bit more diversity there would have been nice. Sylux especially, his theme to me, like when you go into that fight, feels so gamey and like arcadey to me. Like it's like, oh, I'm in a video game boss battle now. It doesn't feel like, and it's not as compelling as I would hope. But I guess it's it's a DS game 2006. I might be asking for a lot.
I will say though the actual music of VDO is in the area really good, but we can talk about that when we talk about music later.
Well, we're detouring, man. I think we just let's keep going. We'll get back to the other rooms. Let's talk more about the music because I had something I wanted to say about the music specifically. Aside from the Sylux theme, which like take it or leave it, whatever. I think it's more so like it's just like when I heard it again, I was like, oh man, this takes me back. Like so maybe it's just that rose tinted glasses. Like it is what it is, and I grew up with it. Um, Going back, the main theme that you first hear when you get to the VDO, like I guess the main gateway theme, whatever it is, that has like that snare drum in it. That stuck out to me super hard because like when I was listening to it, I was like, has any other track like you in the series uses like snare? Like I hope I'm saying the right instrument, but it sounds like
Yeah,
a
yeah,
snare
it's a
drum to
snare.
me.
Yeah.
Okay, like that's not a thing in Metroid tracks a lot of the time. Like I really can't think of any like significant Metroid tracks that use a snare drum like that. When I hear it, I'm like, it sounds so not Metroidy to me, which is kind of fitting for Hunters overall. Like it's a Metroid game, but it's not. It doesn't really have Metroids. It has things that look like Metroids. It has music that sounds like Metroid music, but it kind of doesn't. And that when I first came back and I played this, I was like, wow, that stuck out to me kind of hard because there are a couple songs in this game that feel very inspired directly by Metroid Prime or even like remix some elements of that. This sounds so not Metroid to me because of that snare drum. I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
I think
Yeah. So you want to go first?
I wanted to add. I think they did a good job at invoking that you're in a different galaxy, like
Hmm.
the Tetra galaxy, and like we brought up, the Alimbics are similar to the Chozo, but you're entering this kind of militaristic station, but it's
Yes.
also abandoned, and you can hear like the ambience with the snare drum. I love that kind of almost clashing, but it works kind of mixed to it. So.
Mm-hmm.
I was just gonna say, so yeah, Metroid doesn't typically use snare drums like in their instrumentation. It's not unheard of though. Fusion actually uses quite a bit of snare in a lot of those compositions as well. But yeah, it's not so much the presence of the snare drum, but the way it's used. It's played in this very timpani like marching
Yes.
kind of kind of groove, and that is something that you don't see in Metroid. And normally on its own, it would feel really weird, but I feel like the instrumentation and the pads and the synthesizers that are used with it is really what brings us home. Especially like once you get the full drum kit, you get some of the
Mm-hmm.
shakers and some of the reed instruments, and I feel like it brings like almost this kind of like chozo sound into it, but it also
Hmm.
feels different enough to where it feels like its own unique experience. I really love the main Vesper Defense Outpost theme a lot.
Yeah, I like it too, and I think that's that how you put it is maybe more accurate to what I was saying. Not necessarily it's just using the snare drums, but it has that like military like marching like 1-2 kind of thing to it, which I think also again contributed to like me thinking originally this was a human outpost. That sounds so much like oh
Mm-hmm.
I'm showing up to sign up for the U.S. Army or something like that. Like it doesn't sound alien. It sounds like I'm walking onto a human ship. So that or human space station, whatever it is. So yeah, that it's a really interesting usage that I agree with you, Spire. It does give you that separation of like this is not a place again, like not even just that specific station, but the entire galaxy you're in, completely different. Any other standout comments about the music on video? Because we talked about Sylux's, we talked about the gateway or like the main theme. Any other tracks that kind of stand out, or any other comments on the video music?
Sorry,
Doom.
guys.
I think Spire and I have been holding our tongues about Stasis Bunker. Do you want to get right into there,
Oh,
or do
we
you want to
can.
wait?
I mean, there is a nice trivia bit with
Go for it.
Stasis, but it's like you guys were already foreshadowing the surface of VDO, and then what you find later on, like the tone shift, like 180, all intentional. I think the music adds to that because, like you said, the impression is like, oh, militaristic. This place is organized. They know what they're doing. And then as you go further and you're like, okay, what's going on? They really were making bioweapons. What it's some eerie stuff going on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so well, let's open it up. We have a bunch of other rooms to talk about. Stasis bunker. Let's talk about it. Get into it. Spire, you've been. It seems like you've been bursting at the seams almost to talk about the stasis bunker.
Yeah, I mean, I'll save 75% for
Okay.
multiplayer.
Oh, fair, fair. You're right. You're right.
Great, favorite, but Stasis Bunker, I I love and because especially like I love that you obviously see like the guardians and stuff in their like sealed chambers here, but
Hmm.
there's kind of not just because of the music, which actually is one of my favorite environmental Metroid tracks, is
I
that
agree.
stasis bunker video depths. Like people are doing those projects that I'm replacing music in Metroid Dread. You got to slide that one in. Why don't you put that in the Emmy room, one for one? And so like I love that these guardians are in their sealed chambers, and you're just thinking, when are these guys popping out? They're usually spamming a bunch of rooms. I'm ready to fight, but now that the tone is completely different, it's slowed down. It just adds to it. It adds to that pressure. You've gone in deep already into this base, and so it's kind of it's getting a little horror element, and I love that. Who doesn't love horror with Metroids?
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of the corruption sequence in the Xeno research lab with the Phazon Metroids. It's the same thing where you see them and it's like, well, I know how this is gonna go down. It's only a matter of time, and it's very much the same in this game. And I really think I really love the environmental storytelling in just this one room alone, because not only do you have the Guardians and their stasis tanks, which I mean at this point you don't really know a lot about the Guardians other than
Hmm.
they guard important Alimbic sites, but this is the first time you actually see like where they're created in the laboratories, and you even have that one dead Alimbic that's like holding the door open to the second level, and it makes you wonder like what happened here. Was this a rogue guardian? You never actually find out what happens, but it's really cool detail. And if you actually look around the room, you can actually see the busted tank in advance of where it escaped from, which again, just a super cool detail they didn't have to put into.
Yeah, there's a lot of good environmental storytelling in this area, and also like straight up storytelling as well. Because if you go through the scans in this room and adjacent rooms, which I find really interesting in the entire video, in the stasis bunker, there's a lot of lore on like explaining like kind of how to get to Goria and like what the ooblet is and all that stuff. And then if you go to like another room, like if you go to like the fuel stack, whatever, like the very next room, it's like also don't do that. Like we just explained how to do it, and then we're like, but don't trust us, don't do it, which I think is really funny because why keep the information at all? Lose it to time. And we're like, no, we're gonna explicitly tell you how to get there, but also if you do it, you're boned. So I've always thought that was a really interesting part because it's such a stark contrast, like juxtaposition from one room to another. Like it's almost comedic actually, and how they give you the outline and they're like, beware, but also like if you want to do it, like that's how you do it. I thought that stuck out to me for this room as well.
Well, then speaking of, there's that one Alimbic ghost in compression chamber. I don't know if you remember this, but you have to like jump to scan it,
Hmm.
and like he's like way at top, and he says exactly, he's like, "We sacrificed so much to seal Korea. Don't let that go in vain."
Like,
Okay,
oh.
Sam.
It feels I really like it though, because it feels like that not all the Olympics were in lockstep with each other. Like it really feels like there
Mm.
were individual people writing each piece of lore, where there was
Yeah,
some where it's like, hey, we need to go. The longer that thing stays in there, then the longer the universe is at risk. And there's others that it's like, no, if you unlock it, the universe is destroyed. Like we can't. And it really, I really like that. Not that it's not really a hive mind. It really feels like there's individual personalities in each of these entries.
That's a good
great
point,
point.
actually. Yeah, because I think that also kind of lends to the lore style of the Olympics, where if you look at it in like contrast to like Chozo lore from the Prime trilogy, or even like Space Pirate scans, they're very matter of fact and like to the point. Like there's no like grandiose like poeticness like the Chozo have, and there isn't like that kind of like super like scientific-y and like speculative nature that the space pirates have that almost leans into comedy because they're like, oh, our faces got eaten off by Metroids. We wrote that down.
Wonder what happens if we try out this morph ball technology.
Exactly. Like the Olympics are very like in all caps, don't do this, do that. That we did this and this happened. Like it's very straight to the point. Like you almost can't interpret it any other way, which I find really interesting because I think that like the Chozo be kind, at least the Chozo we know of like on Talon 4, for example, we're pretty much all of like one mind from what we know. So it's, that having that like consistent theme of like it being very like flowery and like how they talk about their lore, like it makes sense. And the space pirates similarly, like they're all of one mind, one goal pretty much, like so a lot of their stuff is very on the same level. With this, like who knows all the Alimbic, individuals, what their goals are, whatever. So it makes sense. I feel like that it's so basic and like to the point, because that's kind of, I guess, what their like general go forwardness was as a race. Like we're doing our jobs. We're making this thing happen.
It actually reminds me a lot of kind of like the Superman origin stories on Krypton, where you had Jor-El, Superman's father, who was talking about the imminent threat of the planet's collapse, and then the rest of the society who just wouldn't listen at all, and it was ultimately their downfall. And there was a lot of infighting between the Kryptonians during that point. And I kind of got the same feeling with like the Alimbics on a similar kind of scale.
It's a lot like, I mean, I've talked about this before. I love that Prime Hunters kind of delved into Metroid meets Lovecraftian horror, and kind of like a lot of Lovecraftian horror stories. Sometimes the warnings are just very blunt. And it's like writing on the wall. And what do people do? They keep going, and then you mess with it, the abyss, and the abyss messes with you back. Thankfully, all 7 of the hunters are okay, but
Yeah, no, 100%. I think if anything, maybe just like the general theme of like the Alimbics, like even if there were different individuals or on different page, I think the crux of who the Alimbics were as characters were very like straightforward, like not gonna lead you astray. Like we had a very clear goal, like even if we achieved it different ways, we had a clear goal, and this is the best way to go about it, being as blunt and as straightforward as possible, because eventually someone's gonna read this. In fact, I think one of the lore entries, either one of the ghosts or one of the like says like, if you're reading this, then we were successful in like putting Goria away. Like don't open it. If you're reading, like they had that forethought, which I think goes into some of the lore in the game where like there's a mention of like their brains being whatever, like they have a big front brain or something. So like they knew to anticipate threats or something, which is like, all right, that's some sci-fi mumbo jumbo, but they were smart enough at some point to like have that forethought of like, we're eventually someone's going to discover this. We need to lay out this path, which differed from the Chozo, which they kind of did the same thing, but it was very wrapped in mysticism. And the space pirates were very clearly writing for themselves. They weren't anticipating anyone else reading it at all. So I like that like it's almost like a horseshoe. Like the Chozo and the space pirates are on different sides of like their goals and how they achieve them, but it eventually like comes kind of together. And then you have like the Alimbics all the way down here, like very different, kind of like in the middle between those two sides there, and kind of draws between both.
Well, I was going to say, there is a little bit of that mysticism as well, because there is, and arguably a very important part of the game.
Oh, the prophecy.
The prophecy.
That's true. That's true.
Which you need to follow to get the true ending of the game. And so
that's fair.
Yeah.
There is some mysticism there. I agree. It's literal prophecy, but also it's like the like most like baby mode Alimbic like prophecy. It's like, you have this green weapon, you better shoot this yellow thing over, like it's that even their prophecies are very kind of baseline and straightforward, so like anyone could almost interpret them, I think. I don't know, Spire, what do you think?
Well, I mean, that kind of circles into the next part of VDO about finding the battle hammer, because kind of black or white, like you said, the simplification is, fire these 6 panels with these 6 different weapons, and the true ending happens. And then the opposite side, where you can delve way down the Metroid theory rabbit hole, is you're like, why is this space pirate nuclear powered weapon in VDO? It is a weapons station and it is nuclear powered. But I always thought as a kid, I was like, I don't think Weevil was like, I'll drop this for Samus later. It's like you're trying to think like, oh, did space pirates maybe come across this place a while back and traded or something like that? So
I just think of it as a weird inconsistency that I just didn't think too hard about. I was like, you know what? It was the only weapons they had. We needed Samus to collect them.
Yeah.
It's not that deep.
I hope she...
Go ahead.
Oh, I've always said, I hope she brings those weapons back. I've always joked, I hope Samus has like a vault in her ship or somewhere where she stores all these awesome weapons like the Imperialist or the Battle Hammer. And then in a future game, she's like, okay, I'm going to bring some of these back.
Yeah,
she should start bringing him with her as backup so that she doesn't have to collect as much stuff during all her missions.
Yeah, I wonder how that works, because like, can't she just like hold that kind of? I don't know. Like, she doesn't have that weaponry going into Metroid Prime 2. What happened? Why does she? I would carry the Imperialist with me on any mission. Is all I'm saying.
I carry the Omega Cannon with me. That thing's got some DPS.
Well, which Omega Cannon?
Yeah.
Because now there's
The
two.
OG.
Because now there's two of them, and
Well,
go ahead.
Because the OG Omega Cannon has infinite ammo.
Right,
Infinite ammo.
but I don't think you
But
could
the
just
other
use
one-
that at any time. It's not like a real weapon. It's not a I mean, it's a real weapon. It's not a regular weapon though. I think you can't use it at any time, can you?
I mean, pull out of your back pocket when the situation heats up. I feel
only
like it would have
on-
come in handy against the Emperor.
Well, yeah, that's the good question. Is like during the true ending after Oubliette, when she sees the Alimbics and they say thank you, did she give it back, or she just like, oh thanks? Because maybe she was like, I don't want the Federation getting this either. You know, that's like they're kind of shady.
Well, I don't know if we're at that point in the timeline. That I feel like at this point, Samus is still pretty naive to a lot of the underdoings of the Federation. Assuming that's even canon still. I mean, who even knows at this rate?
I would say like maybe not naive to it, but I would say probably like I think at that point she's like, I'm doing my job. I'm doing a job, and she probably just reports on anything. It's probably just like an inconsistency that she doesn't, I don't know, maybe doesn't at all mention what happened on this mission. She just took care of it and she didn't write the report afterward. She didn't debrief. I don't know. I also never thought about why. Cause, I mean, is the battle hammer specifically a space pirate developed weapon? Do we know that? Or is it just used by space pirates?
The Weevil's cybernetics was part of that project because his own cyborg suit is nuclear powered, and so the battle hammer works in tangent. Now when it's used by him, it has like the bigger splash radius,
right, but the battle hammer like technology was space pirate developed.
People like basically
so we don't
to that, but
we don't know.
Question.
Well,
okay,
there's other weapons.
We don't
there
know.
are other weapons, like the shot coil, for instance, is a Galactic Federation weapon, which you can find. Which, again, I don't think too hard about it. It's limited resources.
Well, what if like both the pirates and the Federation developed those weapons based on what they found from the Alimbics in the past? That's what I'm kind of thinking. Is like, what if it's not the battle hammer was left there? What if the Alimbics made the battle hammer and the space pirates took it and started making stuff with it? And the Federation maybe did the same. I don't know. That could be a possibility.
It's a lot of conveniently similar weaponry that they all happen to go to the same source from.
Well, they did think ahead with the scan logs, because one of them not only said that the Alimbics traded with the Chozo for information, but the Alimbics are the ones that spawned the power beam, and that's basically like the universal sidearm for the bounty hunters and stuff. So.
That's pretty damning evidence, I think, because if they're getting the direct power beam technology from the Alimbics, who knows what else they took from them or developed or like reverse engineered from what the Alimbics gave the Chozo. I mean, we know the Chozo and the Federation have contact with each other. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that somehow the Federation either got the technology from the Chozo or somehow from the Alimbics, and maybe the space pirates did the same.
This is very video related, and my friend Lee MPH from the Revival Group one, he mentioned this. He's like, oh, this is something that I thought about, is the Cortex CPU, when you go in that morph ball tunnel on VDO and you're going to the battle hammer, everyone has that reaction where they're like, what is that torn up brain thing? You're like, okay, but thank you get to learn a little bit more once you get to the room with the battle hammer. And what he wanted to kind of mention, and this is, Doom said this earlier before the show started, like kind of getting a little hopium, but as a Metroid fan, you're used to it, is if this brain thing is related to, powering a lot of their weapons and devices, and if the Alimbics have met with the Chozo before, and they're stopping invasions, he's like, what if some of those Chozo were mocking, and then they got that information, they learned about the Omega Cannon but couldn't get it, and they're like, oh, there's some like brain devices that run this thing, and that's why you see the brain things in Dread that give you the Omega Cannon, but not the exact thing.
Which is
a fun fan theory, but I don't think the 2D games are ever going to acknowledge hunters.
A coincidence for sure, but I think that is interesting because the Slench boss is a big eye.
Yeah.
And you fight it on VDO, which when I fought that thing, I was like, this is an eye thing from Dread. So I think it's a coincidence, but it's a very, very good point that I think all this could root back to the Alimbics somehow. And I don't think that's a realm out of possibility. It's kind of like, what's that word where like things in the environment are like in nature have a tendency to create like a crab form or a lobster form. You know what I'm talking about? It's like
called Back to Crab. Yeah, the
Yeah,
covert evolution.
exactly. Yeah, it's like covert edge of evolution, where like nature is just like predisposed to build to like the crab or like lobster build because it's so efficient. And that's how I kind of feel like with a lot of themes in Metroid. Like everyone inevitably builds towards bioweapons and brain controlled things and all that kind of stuff, which is why I'm not surprised that there would be these similarities. They're all going from the same source, because that's likely the most efficient, or just like where things end up in the Metroid universe: bioweapons, brains, and all that nonsense. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's all connected.
The Nintendo spies are trying to stop this conversation right now. We've
They're
delved so
knocking on my door.
the
I
Metroid
have a
well has
GameCube
been
controller in
open
here.
up.
About to
the
fight them
Metroid
off.
Bible has been cracked open. They have talked about that. There's stuff we don't know.
Yeah.
Quick, close your Dolphin browser.
Right? Yeah. All right, we've jumped around a lot actually. We've talked about Sylux. We've briefly mentioned the bosses, which I don't think need too much mentioning, because if you've played the game, you know that like these bosses are not unique to the video. To the video, you have the Credifid, which is the big pillar thing that you shoot at, and yes, and then you have the, which we just mentioned, the Slunch, the big eye thing, which is a mixture of the Dread Eyes and also our favorite boss battle, the Samus, evil Samus boss battle from Federation Force, where she rolls around in big morph ball form, is exactly what happens in the Slunch boss battle, where it drops down and rolls around the room in a big ball.
It also uses very similar chord progressions to the Ridley theme, which I think is really interesting. But it's not quite the same, but it's very clearly inspired by it.
Everything comes back to Hunters.
Well, that song, that Meta Ridley song they used in First Hunt is so hard to find when you're looking up Metroid music. And I love Prime Hunters, but it is interesting that they didn't actually bring that song from First Hunt to Prime Hunters, which they did do for VDO in another area, but whenever we talk about Fuel Stack.
Yeah, well, let's jump into it. There's a couple other rooms we haven't mentioned here, like the fuel stack and the compression chamber. But yeah, the fuel stack. I think my biggest note from this one, is again, there's a bunch of lore in this room, which is like, hey, this is how you get to Goria. Also, don't do that seriously.
Miyamoto, please do not do that.
Please don't do this. And then fuel stack, from what I remember, is pretty much the same in single player as it is in multiplayer, aside from you can use the lift in multiplayer, from what I remember. That's correct, right, Spire?
You can use the lift. I mean, once we delve into multiplayer, there's the cool tactics you can do. So
Okay.
obviously, once it's multiplayer, there's going to be new items, and so you're working for some of those items, taking risks. But
Yeah. Well, you know what? Now that I'm looking at the time, we're already 58 minutes into this episode. So you know what? I think it's about that time. And actually, I kind of like this style of Mapping Metroid, where we just kind of jump around and talk about whatever we think is most interesting. And I think we've done that because, truthfully, I don't care that there's 2 missile expansions in this area. So we're not going to talk about that. I don't care. There are 2 missile expansions in this area. There's also 2 universal ammo expansions in this area. You might pick them up. You might not. It's cool. There's like a 2D.
It's a free country. You can do what you want.
You can do what you want. There's also a sideways morph ball maze in there. It's totally cool. And obviously there are a bunch of enemies we've also already mentioned in a lot of these places. Before we go to the multiplayer thing, I have to mention something about the enemies. We mentioned the Petrosils, which are like the not Metroid like jellyfish things you can touch. There's also the Quadroids, which are like lizards with like Metroid heads. And those also are coincidentally not Metroid related at all. And also it's not explained why they exist, except the Alimbics made them for some reason. But once again, everything converges, like crab form, Metroid form. In the Metroid universe, the most efficient form is a Metroid. Therefore, everything must be building to become that. But I thought
what is Metroid going to return to Monkey, though?
Alimbics were right.
I mean, aren't there, there are some enemies, I want to say, doesn't like Other M have like a Metroid, it has a couple of Metroid forms or Space Pirate forms that are kind of like ape-like, maybe. I'm trying to remember.
I don't know.
Maybe I'm just thinking of one of the Metroid forms that are like, or one of the Space Pirate enemies that Samus DDTs a bunch. Anyway.
Honestly, now that you mention it real quick, some of the only mammals in Metroid are humans. Look at even like the Prime Hunters themselves. Obviously, we assume Sylux is human, but Spire, Trace, Candon, Noxus, they're not mammals. Yeah.
As far as we know, they're not mammals. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
There are a few of those, and even the other animals in the they're mammal-esque, but are they actually mammals? But speaking of that, there's also those little dinosaur things on video. I don't remember what their name is, but I do remember that they like roar at you with like a generic like I found this sound on the internet like dinosaur sound, which I always thought was really funny. It's like, why is this? How did this thing get here? Why is it here? What is it eating? Like, is it eating the jellyfish thing? And it's like, I felt like that was such a weird thing to have in this area. I don't know why it's there.
Yeah, those things are only found on the space stations, I believe, weirdly enough. But I can't. There might be some lore explaining why they're on the space stations, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
Well, I'm about to ruin the magic. Speaking of, but
Okay.
big trivia is that Sylux also uses stock monster sounds, and
He
so
does.
like
He
that.
he like roars
Mhm.
when you hit him, which I think is really funny.
Yeah.
Is he a dinosaur?
I remember in 2007, and when they were trying to push Blu-ray versus DVD, I'll never forget the commercial that tried to sell a player that was both, and it had a dinosaur, and it used Sylux's sound bit. I was like, how'd they get the rights to that Metroid sound?
That would be the craziest lore spin ever. We end up finding out that Sylux is not human or humanoid at all. A humanoid dinosaur, really. Because, I mean, Sylux, even in the cutscenes, Sylux inexplicably roars into the air for some reason. No one knows why. Like, that is not human. You can
Yeah.
tell me it's human, unless they've got the dinosaur voice pack and it's just a guy in there,
I was
like,
about to say
yelling.
he's just having some fun with voice mod. That's all.
I do love that sound.
They gave him a Twitch tier 3 sub, and he wanted to just please the viewers.
That actually would be better if we just find out it's just a guy in a suit like who had downloaded some like voice software and is just like going around trying to be like a Vocaloid bounty hunter or something. Like,
It's like
I'm
Wat Tambor in Star Wars. You have to modify.
yeah, I'm down for that. Actually be kind of cool. Just some guy. Okay, enough about all that. It's now time to talk about the game from a multiplayer perspective here. Spire. There are 5 maps,
Yeah.
all involving the rooms we pretty much talked about. The VDO gateway, we have weapons complex, we have the compression chamber, we have the stasis bunker, we have the fuel stack. I'm going to lead off here first. Out of those 5 maps, which one do you think is the best? Which one do you think is the worst of those 5?
Oh man,
And why?
You're hitting me with a challenge here. So
Put you on the spot.
I'm very optimistic, and I do like all 5. But as a Spire main,
Okay.
I love weapons complex because the Dialanche had that ability where you could climb up walls, but you couldn't climb over the walls. But when you go to low gravity, you just spin enough momentum that you fly up anyway. So Spire and Sylux are the only characters that can go into alt mode and fly to the very top of weapons complex ASAP. You can grab the health orb and the Imperialist. Candid and Samus have to do like bomb jumps and wait a bit, but those two get to go up there ASAP. I love that. In terms of the hardest map, VDO Gateway. If I'm not using Imperialist, Magmaul is kind of a short mid-range weapon, does a lot of damage there. But on that map, if Trace is all the way on the other side, oh man, I gotta approach in a very smart way. So
That makes a lot of sense. I would not want to be on Video Gateway as Spire. Actually, I would even say that I've never picked Spire on that map. Doom, what about you? Top to
Yeah,
bottom.
I'm gonna say Video Gateway probably my least favorite, just because there's
Okay.
like no cover on that map at all, and I'm a Sylux main, so I like to get up close and personal. Video Gateway definitely not the home turf advantage there. Despite despite the Sylux boss fight just a few rooms later. I got a real soft spot for Stasis Bunker, just because of like how complex the area is. I really love the verticality that the level has, and I also think it's really cool. We were talking about this before the podcast, but Stasis Bunker is the first area ever shown from Metroid Prime Hunters when the game was revealed at E3 2004. You can find it in that original gameplay footage, and it's even included in the first Hun demo that was bundled with the DSs. It's exclusive to the Morph Ball training mode, but if you actually pay attention to the map layout, it's pretty much one-to-one identical. Obviously, you don't have some of the details like Guardians and stuff like that, but that raw map layout and that overall theming is still like completely intact. And so I think it's really cool that they basically that map basically made it to the final game relatively unchanged for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with both of you there, and that's actually really cool. A bit of like, hey, we're gonna reuse this because it was actually really good, and also we don't want to make another thing. Especially, I mean, considering Hunters has a lot of maps actually.
Yeah, same thing with Combat Hall. I mean, the fan favorite, probably like most well known map
Be
from that
there.
game.
Yeah.
Yep. And then there's another Celestial Archives map. I think it's Trooper Module, but it's based off another map from the final game as well.
Hmm. I mean, my favorite map in the game is still Harvester, so which is not a
Oh,
video map, but I
yeah,
love Harvester. Harvester's so good. For me, I actually think this is one of the weaker gateway maps. I'm always a big fan of Alanos Gateway. That was my go-to favorite. I know you like Alanos Gateway, but in general, I always loved Alanos Gateway for the same reasons. Crawling around as Spire was dope.
all the best.
Obviously, the Imperialist ledge where you can snipe from there is really cool. So as a Trace main, that was where I went immediately. I think I kind of stayed away from like fuel stack and weapons complex for me, especially because complex has those holes in the ground that you can fall through, which I would do. Compression chamber and stasis bunker are, I think, very just like straightforward, like skill based maps. Like you can't really cheese too hard on those. I think it comes down very much to individual skill and map knowledge, and not like I play Spire, so I'm going to be able to get up to the top of the map before you, or I can fall through a hole. So not I mean overall, I actually think the video has kind of my batch of like not super favorite maps in the game, but also like maps I don't mind playing on.
It's the hidden. You think Alanos is the poster Spire planet, but also VDO for in terms of maps, because Fuel Stack is the other map where most hunters have a hard time getting to the very, very, very top little room that has
Yes,
the Imperialist and the Health Orb.
hate
But
that.
Spire can just wall climb, so he gets to get that pretty easily. Also, real quick, I should mention on VDO Gateway, the glass bowl at the bottom increases the mobility of all the hunters, including in their alt forms. So that usually is my necessary way to like approach a lot and like to like a sniping trace. But also,
Mhm.
I don't know if you guys ever did this, and the Revival Discord told me to bring this up. I had to. Is Noxus Beyblade fights, and people would go into their bow sight and go to the bottom of VDO Gateway and just do like giant bow sight fights with the double damage in the middle. So
That's
I
actually
can't say I've
dope.
ever done that before. I don't remember there being double. I remember there was like the Death All power up. I don't remember there being like a double. That doesn't surprise me though. There's a lot of Quake influence in Metroid Prime Hunters between stuff like that. The jump pads, which are basically ripped right from Quake.
I love jump
But
pads.
yeah,
Mm-hmm. Uh, yeah, I think that's kind of why I also stayed away from fuel stack, is because if I hated losing that rush to the top or bottom, which is kind of annoying. Um, what would you say that Spire? What do you out of these five maps? Like, what do you think maybe would, if they were to be like, let's say all five of these maps were brought back for like Metroid Prime 4 multiplayer or something like that? Which one of these do you think would need the most like remaking? Like, has it some problems, needs to be fixed, like could be done in a different way rather than just like a one-to-one port?
Are we bringing characters not from this game? Because if we do that, they don't have alt forms that we know of. So that does alter.
Let's say it's the same characters that are in Hunters.
or like
Okay.
OCs.
So we're remaking the game. Uh, I love Fuel Stack. That again, you can Noxus Judicator freeze someone to heaven. They just get the SD and -1. I think that would be the highest learning curve map, and I think a lot. If Metroid's trying to come back after this Dread momentum, you got a lot of new players. I think it is interesting. You'd probably have to think about like all these kids getting on Fuel Stack and not understanding the physics and just mass
Yeah.
SD murder over and over and over. I mean, to the point that even Noxus and Spire can easily SD, because if you use your alt form attack for those two, they dip down. Like all the gravity is gone for those two. So there's so
Hmm.
many ways you can mess up on Fuel Stack. I think that's the target. That's the one they're looking at. And they're like, okay, because I think honestly a map like Stasis Bunker, you could put that in GoldenEye or Halo.
Yeah.
It's got enough Metroid DNA, but it doesn't have any necessary alt form routes, so you could slap that into another FPS and it'd still be super fun.
Okay, I agree with that. I think the same of compression chamber as well. Actually, Doom, what do you think? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, pretty much agree. Remake Stasis Bunker.
I would go with maybe remaking Video Gateway and kind of giving it a bit more depth, like maybe some more cover, just a bit more than just being like a huge open like shoot through the middle and get body from wherever you are kind of map. Um, yeah, definitely probably my least favorite of these 5 maps. So I'd probably go with like a maybe not a full remake, but like just something to set it apart from like the single player version because this is essentially structurally pretty much the same, which is well, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, honestly, I would probably. I don't know if this is a hot take or not. I would probably. I wouldn't cut all of the gateway map. I mean, there's no way we're cutting Alanos Gateway, but like, I feel like I would cut most of the gateways from the multiplayer roster personally. They kind of feel like filler maps to me.
Hmm. Yeah,
But no,
I can see that.
Alanos Gateway is goated though. We can't get rid of
Alno's
that.
Gateway is dope. It just so happens to be dope. Spire, you're about to say
Yeah.
something.
I mean, it's one of the only 2 maps with lava, so I love those ones.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about Hunters is that like every map is like pulled from the single player campaign, like almost like one to one.
Well, I think it's the opposite. I feel like the multiplayer maps are incorporated into the single player. I feel like that's what they were going because again, like First Hunt, like all of those multiplayer maps are reused in both the multiplayer and the single player as well. But they first appear as multiplayer.
Well, I guess that's true, but in the nature of the game, though, some of those maps you can't play on until you play them in the campaign, until you've gotten.
That is true, yeah.
So I think it's like a chicken or the egg kind of situation. Like they made maps and maybe they turned them into like the campaign, or they made the campaign. They're like, well, we made this big square, like it works as a map. Let's just take it out, you know. Maybe not entirely sure which came first, but I think that's kind of the novelty of Hunters because so many maps in the game are taken like straight from the campaign. Like obviously you play like other games like Halo and all that stuff. Like a lot of the maps are very clearly based on instances from the campaign, but aren't as one to one taken. You know, like they take the theme, they take the aesthetics, they take some structural motifs, but otherwise they kind of make it its own thing. Whereas Hunters is just like copy paste, just drop that in there and boom, boom, bam. And I think that's kind of the novelty of it. So as much as I would kind of want some of these remakes, I don't know if I want them entirely.
I was gonna say, I think Hunters only has 2 original multiplayer maps that are not like referenced in the single player at all. Because you got Harvester, and then there's another map I can't remember, but it uses that same video multiplayer theme when you're escaping the fuel stack, and I can't remember the name of it right now.
I was waiting for that drop. I was like, I'm gonna let Doom do that. I love that the only multiplayer song in the campaign is in Fuel Stack. So
right,
I love the video multiplayer music because it starts with that, and I just love that. It gets me pumped to play. So.
I love all the multiplayer music in this game.
Oh yeah.
Hunters has an underrated soundtrack. It really does. And it's like one of those things where, oh, it was on the DS. It doesn't, same thing that kind of Fusion has where like people don't appreciate it because of the hardware it's on, which I think kind of does the both game soundtracks kind of a disservice. Hunters has a lot of good stuff. And obviously as Hunters fans, I mean, I have the main menu theme burned into my brain. But there's so many good aspects of this soundtrack, and they come out here at VDO in spades.
Yeah. Oh, completely. No, I love the Prime Hunters soundtrack. I would hope, we're talking about bringing the characters back and the maps back. Imagine doing a few callback songs in a future Metroid game.
Oh my god, give me a Kenji Yamamoto composed Guardians theme, please. I would.
Yeah. Well, when Psycho Bits appeared in Smash 4 and Ultimate,
yeah,
that was awesome.
So I actually used to not be a fan of the Psycho Bits theme. I was just like, this is a bit leaning too much into the rock era. This isn't really like I'm a metalhead. I love metal. You can even probably see my Megadeth poster in the back.
You like metal? I did not know that.
Well, no, but usually I'm generally not a fan of when Metroid like sounds too much like real life genres. I like Metroid better typically, when it's trying to meld the atmosphere and the environments and creatures together into its own unique soundscape. But when they brought that over into Smash, they used a lot higher quality samples, and there was just something about that I started appreciating that theme a lot more than I initially did when it was on the DS.
I'll have to go back and re-listen to that, or maybe set it on my setup to play now that you have more control over songs in Ultimate. Spire, any other multiplayer takeaways or tips and tricks or anything, as a competitive Hunters player on the maps here in VDO?
I love hearing your guys' insight so far because it's true for a lot of it. Compression chamber, it's got those little like morph ball holes in the middle, so
Mm-hmm.
you have to travel that way, and that's just a natural choke point. Like for Spire, the Magmall has such an active hitbox at short mid range. You are just lobbing so many Magmall shots between those,
Yep.
as you're just doing so much damage because so much of the fight happens on that lower floor. There's 2 health orbs, so you can just start firing in both directions and nab a lot of KOs that way. I mean, you talk, Doom talked about the inspiration from Quake. And that's such a good inspiration to have, like that fast action. Your mind is getting better at locating these items, and so then now you're understanding like where players are wanting to go each time. And so in this case, as a Spire player, I'm wanting to capitalize on that mid range, and compression chamber is perfect. I wanted to add that part.
Yeah, I love the Quake influence that Hunters very clearly has. And it makes sense, like mid early 2000s, like arena FPS, like was still a hot off the trail of what Doom had done in the 90s. Or I'm sorry, what Quake had done in the 90s. So like I looked at Doom and I immediately thought Doom instead of Quake. So yeah, I love that. And even like it comes down to like even the map design, you know, obviously feels very, Quake, like Halo, like arena FPS, like right down to the, the nitty gritty. So yeah, I love that, like kind of like thinking like as a player, like competitively of, map control and maps like, compression chamber and stasis bunker. Like those are maps that like are so contingent on that, and having that, that game awareness and control over multiple parts of a map from a single point, which is so crucial.
Well, and you guys, I've seen the discussion lately about you guys making lists about value, your most is like valued Metroid games based on replayability, and I was like, well, if it's competitive, I just love improving at this game. So
Yeah, for sure.
it's like speedrunners. So
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that again is why I want multiplayer to come back to Metroid. It gives you that replayability, just like speedrunning does, or even something like boss rush mode. Gives you another way to jump into the game and optimize and get better and all that, which is really cool.
Yeah, and
Um,
I've talked about it on the podcast before, but
mhm.
like, there's so much stuff that Hunters does that I feel like people take for granted now because like a lot of this stuff wasn't mainstream. Like I've talked about it before, like if you think about it, Hunters was like I don't know if it was the first, probably not, but I feel like it was one of the first, multiplayer shooters to like really incorporate these kind of hero mechanics and special abilities, and like
Hmm.
that really wasn't a thing in 2006 for the most part, when this game came out. But now, I mean, you have like Overwatch, you have Call of Duty in some entries that have
Apex,
this.
Valorant, like
Yeah, Apex,
hero,
yeah,
like character-based hero shooters are so
TF2,
huge now. TF2 was like kind of the proto game for that, even after
yeah.
Hunters. So like, yeah, no, you're 100% right. Like that's one of the earliest adopters of that, when everyone like was so much about like even starts, like you come into the same thing as everyone else, and Hunters kind of flipped that and was like, no, like you're very much specifically picking for the character and that play style, and that's going to affect how you go into it. But you can also use the other weapons that the other, just not to the same efficiency, which was a
It's a
nice
little
spin
bit
on it.
a little bit of both because you do have that kind of arena shooter, kind of that Halo thing
Exactly. Yeah.
where you do start off on even footing, but the power ups are so easy to come across that like eventually like you start gaining your hero abilities like pretty much right as you spawn.
Hmm.
I love that I can pick Noxus and my muscle memory of the Magmall transfers. All I have to do is say, okay, I can't burn people though. Yeah, so it's like
Hmm.
Hmm.
definitely that small switch, but
Yeah. No, those little touches of like you don't have to be locked into what your character is good at, but there's gonna be drawbacks to that. Like if you want to mix and match, like, oh, I want to use this main weapon, but I'm using this character that gives me a different alt form. That's great, but it's not gonna be as efficient as Trace using Annihilator, whatever it is, or Magmall coming from Spire or whatever, right? So yeah, like that's a nice little touch. We're just kind of branching out into overall Hunter's love
great.
here. Um,
Just real quick,
and
I sorry.
no, I was gonna say I said
No, no,
Annihilator, but
go for it.
I meant Imperialist. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, I. You know what's cool? I love. Okay, first off, when Dread came out, the revival group was all like, "This is awesome. We want to support Metroid. Metroid's back. We knew Prime 4 was announced, but here we go, game after game. Hopefully, it's not just that. I love seeing all these new Metroid fans come in, and
Yeah.
I especially love it when I've had a few people like message me or they'll talk to me and they start getting a little more into hunters and then they start playing a little bit of multiplayer or just looking into it and they're like what you guys just mentioned, they're like, there's so much detail. This isn't a game with 6 other different palette swaps of Samus. They're all so unique and they play differently. I was like, oh yeah, if you're gonna review hunters or play it, play some multiplayer against bots, play as these other characters. It's
Mm-hmm.
huge.
The game had native voice chat that you could use on the DS, and you can't do that in most Switch games today.
Dude, I would have like group meetings with like my clan or like the forums I was on like a gateway map like through DS voice. Like I'd hold it up to my face to talk to people. Like that was like sitting on my bed at night. Like that was crazy way back then. Yeah, so many good times. Spire, definitely want to have you back on here for another Metroid Prime Hunters show. I feel like we could talk about Hunters for an entire day's worth of content here, and maybe we just do that. Maybe we decide, you know what, we're going to record 24 episodes worth of content, and we're just gonna sit here and talk about Hunters for 24 hours straight, and then that'll be 24 episodes worth. Like we'll have how
It's like
many?
months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of the 12 days of Christmas, it's going to be the 12 days of Hunters.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, we'll be good to go. We'll have, what, a sixth of the year covered or eighth of the year covered just on straight up, like, or even more than that. Actually, my math is awful. Like 2/3 of the year or a third of the year covered with just talk about hunters. I'm sure everyone would love that. Spire, any last comments on the video here in Hunters in terms of an area? Anything else we haven't covered or overall thoughts, feelings, anything?
You guys brought up a great detail I completely forgot about. I'm so glad you did ASAP about that shrapnel, the orbiting stuff outside that you can witness.
Hmm.
And throughout this whole episode, it just, makes me and sounds like you guys realize there's so much subtle detail they put into this. And
Mm-hmm.
I love stuff like that. And it's almost to Metroid Prime's formula, you can read the scan logs to learn everything, but outside of the scan logs, there's not a lot of hand holding. It's you're kind of using your mind to put things together of why things are going that way, and I love that Hunters displays that too, in element to the Prime games. So
Yeah, I
Well,
agree.
if you really think about it, like the first thing that you see in VDO, is the frozen fuel like orbiting the station. But then the last room that you visit is one of those exploding fuel tanks that you have to shut down before more of that stuff gets released and takes you with it. So a really cool kind of roundabout through line there.
Yeah, I think like obviously the Hunters campaign is hit or miss for people and certainly has its fall or downfalls and just kind of flaws, but I think it really is kind of undersold as a Metroid Prime campaign where it does have, like you were talking about Doom earlier, like really strong environmental storytelling, and then if you want to go deeper, you get into the scans and it has that more direct storytelling. That's Prime Metroid Prime through and through, whether it's on the GameCube, the Wii, or the DS or whatever it is. So I think that's still a really good strong point of Hunters, even the campaign aspect, that it still captures that feeling that a Metroid Prime game brings. Sure, the bosses are kind of repetitive. Okay, fine, but like it has that like you can get into it and you can scratch the surface and still get like a story out of where you're going to, or you can go deeper if you choose and you get that much more depth and value out of it, which is what we come to know as being a strong suit of the Metroid Prime series in general.
Well, I mean, the reason basically that we're doing this episode in general is because I had so much fun when I did replay this game over the summer, and I was like, man, I really want to talk about one of these areas.
Mm-hmm.
Because man, there's so much cool stuff in this game that I forgot about, and I think we can like fairly acknowledge even even Spire, the biggest Metroid Prime Hunter fan on the planet. I think we can all acknowledge the shortcomings of the campaign.
Right.
A lot of the reused assets, the bosses and stuff like that. Some of the more repetitive combat encounters. I think we can all acknowledge that and be honest about that. But still, I think appreciate what this game does right. And I feel like
Yep.
those unique attributes, along with that player mode, I feel like is enough to make this game really stand on its own.
I 100% agree. I took the words right out of my mouth. And I was going to ask you what your final thoughts were, but Doom, I think those were solid final thoughts to round things out on this. I 100% agree. I think there's still so much meat on the bone for Hunters, so I hope we revisit it soon instead of talking about our hopes and dreams for Metroid again for the
We almost
50th
could
time.
revisit it. Almost.
Yeah, what are you referring to?
The Did You Know Gaming episode with
Oh, yeah.
the Project Valkyrie
Yes,
cancellation,
yes,
which
yes.
absolutely gutted me.
Some of the revival members were in that video. Like they had to get a multiplayer footage, and we were like, "Dude, that's you!" Like last race.
So,
Nice.
yeah, hearing that we could have gotten another Hunters twice, and then instead we got Federation Force, that sucked. I really hated hearing that.
That was, yeah.
That was information I did not need, and I would have been happy going through life not knowing that. But alas, I think our time will shine again, and we'll definitely talk about. I mean, I would love to do another Hunters specific episode, maybe diving, more into Hunters in general, into the multiplayer in general. I would love to do a multiplayer episode with you, Spire, and I think we will. In fact, as one of the hosts of this show, I'm going to say that we are going to. So we will have you back on the show. But I think that's it. We've been chatting about the VDO and Hunters in general for almost an hour and a half here. I think it's about time to wrap up and close our thoughts. We've definitely gone through, we went through all the major rooms. We went through enemies, bosses, the music, the general lore, the general vibes, how we feel about it, like, music, multiplayer. I think we covered it all, guys. So I want to thank both of you for joining me on the show here. Of course, Doom, glad to be running things here with you once again. Getting me, you, and Andy on the show is almost it's like a legend or myth at this point. But
occasionally the planets align and we get it together. I'm sure once once E3 comes, we'll have to make it happen at the very least by that. So.
Well, I was gonna say it'll definitely happen before that. That's 6 months from now. Yeah, I mean, it's my schedule obviously was busy towards the end of the year. Andy's been busy. But hey, that's what we hold it down. We make it happen week in and
I'm
week
still
out.
busy. I don't know how right now I'm on breaks, but I don't know how I was able to be on the podcast as much as I was during the last
which I appreciate. Which I appreciate because you've helped me out quite a bit. And then Spire, of course, thank you so much for joining us on the show. It was a pleasure. You're extremely active in the community and one of our, favorite community members and people to have around. So we appreciate you being a fan of the show and now part of the show. Any final words or shout outs for you?
Yeah. Shout outs to the MPH active players community. When I got back into playing online in 2020. And when I found out that some of these guys never left once Wi-Fi shut down, they did the other methods to play online.
Right.
I was amazed the dedication. Mm-hmm. And as a competitor, I love trying to keep up with them. And then also, I'd like to give a shout out to the Woods Pokemon Draft League. There's a lot of growing Metroid fans there. We play competitive Pokemon, but just like when I play Smash, they'll be like, Spire, Metroid? I go, yeah. And you just start talking about Metroid and just keep growing that community. So
nice. Yeah. Glad to hear that. And yeah, we're glad that the Hunters community is still going strong, even to this day in 2023, which is crazy to say 17 years later, whatever it's been. That's all I've got. At least I don't have any big shout outs. I was at Let's Make Big Moves, a big Smash tournament this past weekend, which was a lot of fun. So shouts to everyone I saw there. It was great seeing everybody. It was a lot of fun. And of course, my boy Tweak holding it down for Tri-State champion for Ultimate. That's all I've got. So I think it's time to wrap things up. Thank you both for joining me, and thank you all for tuning in. There's another episode here of the Omega Metroid podcast. You can follow myself at @DaxCity_. We have Doom at @DoomIt'llCross. And then we have Spire here at @Spire_fan. That's correct. Cool. Awesome. You can check us out at Omega Metroid Pod on Twitter. And check us out here on YouTube, which, you might be following or watching this episode right now there. Of course, we're on all your favorite podcast platforms. I'm sure you're already aware because you're listening to this. Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Play, whatever it is, you can find us. And, of course, OmegaMetroid.com. We have new episodes, new articles, news, fan little teasers and bites. We jump into, reviews of Metroidvanias. We have a bunch of awesome people contributing to the site, so be sure to check that out. We have a Patreon where if you want to hear more of Andy and him talk about random movies nobody likes, you can totally check that out. And if you want to, or he also does really cool ROM hacks. So actually, that's obviously, Andy, if you're listening, I'm on your side on this one. I like the ROM hack reviews, is all I'll say. But no,
we have a merch store now.
We have a merch store.
Give us
yes,
money.
Everything. Well, aside, everything that Andy's doing on the Patreon has been great. We have a merch store now. You can get some merch. But I think that's about it. So thank you all for tuning in to the Omega Metroid podcast, the best and only weekly Metroid podcast out there. Be sure to let us know in the comments in Discord. Join us on Discord. Hang out with some other Metroid fans. Otherwise, have a great day, night, morning, afternoon, weekday, weekend, week, wherever you are listening to this. Thank you for tuning in. We really much appreciate you all. And we will see you next time for the next episode of the Mega Metroid Podcast. Have a good one.